So again, welcome for anyone who joined in a little later. Welcome to the World Usability Day Austria. Our topic this year is the same as for the World Usability Day, the official one, Design for Our Online World, Trust, Ethics, and Integrity. And we prepared or provided opportunities for anyone who wants to join in live, for anyone who wants to take part in the discussions on here in a Zoom call. If you're still on YouTube and want to join the Zoom call, just go into the description and you find the link to our Zoom call there as well. First of all, I want to thank all the organizers who are also online and made everything possible from all around Austria. So thanks to Daniel, Christiane, Elmar, Konrad, and Thomas, as well as one person who's not up here, Patrick, who also supported us within the whole organization. And also thanks to our speakers, Michaela or Ella, I think she's called, Thomas and Peter. They will be introduced by the communities they are speaking for. So don't worry, you will have enough time to meet them all. Another thanks goes to our sponsors and partners, also from around Austria. And it's really amazing and an honor for me to speak again and host this event here for the second time already. So I will do the overall moderation, but we will have moderators for each single talk as well. Now, first of all, about our agenda. We have a warm welcome here. You find the agenda in our Miro board. I posted the link again, and you will have a navigation throughout the board. If you don't know where you are, just click on the link somewhere, and then you'll see all the areas here. In the meantime, while you're waiting for the first talk to start, you can go to our discussion board and leave us some notes around the topics inclusive and universal design, designer's code of ethics, and dark patterns. Leave your own comments, leave your thoughts, your questions. There might be someone in this call or on YouTube watching us who might answer or have additional ideas around the topic. So just drop in any links, any articles, any books you can recommend, but also your questions. We're free to have everything on here live. You also find the links to our Q&A section in Slido. And for anyone who hasn't been on Slido before, just go to slido.com with the code WOOD2021 or join the link on direct link with this one here. So you also find the link on our Miro board and also the direct link. So no matter where you are, you find it. And until everyone is joining, because there are a lot of people joining in a little later, I have a few questions for you that you might answer. So we have a short poll asking you where you're joining us from, and maybe you can also provide us your job title. This would be amazing, because all these online events are so kind of not too personal, because I'm talking to a screen right now and not to people sitting in front of me, which is kind of weird, but I'm used to it for now over a year. And you can also go to our Wonder board and find our very, very nice welcoming guest book and provide us just your name, a photo, a drawing, whatever you want to share there. Just make a copy of anything in here and put it somewhere so you can be part of it. Okay, that's the first things you have to know around our topic. Now let's briefly go through our agenda. We have three very interesting talks and very different talks. The first talk is brought to us from Salzburg. Christiane, can you say a few words about the talk of the first talk. So it will start in around 10 minutes. I think there will be still people joining in all the time. So Christiane, what can we expect from this talk?
Yeah, we have invited an amazing speaker from Ubisoft Düsseldorf. I used to work with her years ago, and she was always inspiring me as well. I think I was as well inspiring her. So we both have quite a common past, but it was great for me to see that she kind of stepped onto the path of accessibility, which I find very interesting. So I asked her if she would kind of give us some insights about how important accessibility is, in particular also in the game industry, where she ended up working now for over a year. So yeah, be curious to find out more.
Oh, that's great. So we will hear about accessibility, which has taken a large part of our UX design world in the past few years. The second talk we will listen today is around 5:45 p.m. Local time zone here. And Thomas, maybe you can tell us one or two sentences about what we can expect from your talk about trust and experiences.
Hello, of course, it's a pleasure. Actually, I will give a short insight into the topic of how to design for trust and how the effect of different patterns that came up recently, or better, they were always there, these design patterns, but in the last 10 years, actually, the dark patterns, but also not only dark, but also angel patterns and so on, good patterns came up that give designers a guidance for how to be and how to behave towards an ethical UX approach.
Okay, great to hear. So we will talk about not only accessibility, but also about how to build trust, or how to maybe get rid of trust from the users. So, great things to hear. And our third talk is provided is brought to us from Graz. And I would like to welcome Konrad, who is moderating our session from Graz. Welcome, Konrad. What can we expect from our third talk?
So thank you also for this opportunity to contribute. We are a University of Applied Sciences, but although I'm very industry minded, and that's what we train our students to be successful in work and as self-employed or employed designers. But so since we have talks from the industry side, now we have also from the academic side. And Vienna is, of course, the biggest city, also the biggest UX community. And we are happy to have Peter Purgathofer from Vienna University of Technology as certainly one of the very few very senior figures in UX and HCI in Austria. I'd just like to mention Manfred Celigi and Verena Giller, who co-founded the very first consultancy, and Keith Andrews, who founded the Graz community, and also maybe Andreas Holzinger from that time. So, and Peter Purgathofer, I think, is one of those people who already in the early 90s were active in that field and bridges the gap between computer science, software development, design, and society, and what user experience and human-computer interaction is basically all about. And we look forward to a certainly very inspirational talk about coding and ethics and humanity on the other side.
Okay, well, sounds great. So we have three really great talks, and I'm really curious and looking forward to listen to all of them. And you might have found that there is a little break in between before we start our open discussion, where everyone is decided. And I quickly repost the mirror link since everyone wants to look at it. For everyone who joined in late, I have to repeat that a few times in the beginning because there might still be people dropping in. On YouTube, you find it in the description below. You find a Q&A link and the link to the Miro board. So just to be aware that you find everything. Now back to the agenda. We have a little break, which is actually not a real break because we have a surprise for you. We prepared something to fill the break, some interactive part where you can, if you want to, join kind of a casual talk here on Zoom, which is also provided live to everyone who's on the stream. But you can also provide us with some additional things. You will hear more about it later as soon as we go into the break, or you can just go and grab a drink and come back at 7 to watch our open discussion. And that brings me to the open discussion. The open discussion is around today's theme. So we will talk about ethical design. We will talk about building trust. We will talk about integrity. We will have something you can join our discussion later on. So it's not only for organizers, speakers, anyone in the Zoom call is invited to join, ask questions, or bring up their own voice. So it's really for everyone. And after the official part at 7:30 ends, we will close the YouTube stream and go into a networking session where everyone is invited to do some networking, meet people, ask questions that might not be answered in the Q&A after the talks. So most of the speakers will be there, so they might answer your question afterwards if it wasn't answered before. And you can also turn on the camera there because we won't record anything. We won't stream it to somewhere else. So feel free to turn on the camera in the networking. It's really more comfortable to see a face in front of you. The link to the Wonder Room is provided again on our Miro board, and we will share the Miro link a lot of times today so everyone finds it. And for anyone who isn't down here in our guestbook, feel free to put your own photo ideas. I've already prepared an example how this could look like, and just get creative. We are a lot of creative people here, but also people who might be more serious from the universities. You can also fill it in a more serious way, or you can get crazy like me. Everything's fine with us. We want to include everyone. And you see in the middle of the board, there is the link to the Wonder starting at 7:30 after our talks. And I think that's the final sentence from my side, because it's almost 5:15, and I think it's time to hand over to Christiane from Salzburg, and she will start introducing and moderating our talks, our session from Salzburg. So welcome again, Christiane, and I put you on spotlight.
Thanks, Johannes, for the great introduction. I had already the pleasure to give you a short teaser on the upcoming speaker. Maybe just a little bit of a background why I choose her, or why I choose in general also that topic, and I thought it would fit so well to the World Usability Day is, it is more than 5 years ago that I was invited to come to Ubisoft and kind of have a workshop there and bring knowledge about UX design to their studio. And from that day on, they all got really curious and they built up their own UX design team and research team. And it was really great for me to see how big it is. So there are more than 10 people, and Michaela, who calls herself Ella as well, she joined a year ago. And I think with her passion about accessibility, she made that team even more diverse. And once I heard from her manager, from Eva, that they are doing a certification accessibility, I was like, I can't believe a game studio is doing a certification accessibility. Yeah, and when I heard the topic of this year's World Usability Day, I just thought this is the perfect match. So I reached out and she was more than happy to come and join us today. So that's all from my side. Ella, the floor is yours. Please introduce yourself, whatever you want to say about you. And then we're more than curious to find out what accessibility and game industry have in common or how they can benefit from each other.
All right, thank you so much. I hope you can hear me. Hi, everyone. My name is Ella. Thank you for the great introduction. It's great to be here. I want to keep it fairly short. I work as a UX designer at Ubisoft in Düsseldorf, and my talk today is going to be about my experience and my learnings about accessibility and universal design. And that is a topic that really regards us all. It doesn't matter if you're a UX designer, a UI designer, a product owner, a project manager, a developer, a teacher, a student, a researcher. It is really a topic that is universally applicable. Let me just share my screen real quick, and then we're going to head into it. So my main goal with my talk is really to gauge your interest and to provide you a little bit of a bigger picture of why accessibility is actually so important and why it's going to make you a better designer at the end of the day. I'm going to make a few side notes about the video game industry, but I hope you're not disappointed if this is not all about games. Trust me, I would love to talk about games like the entire evening, but that's not why I'm here. Also, please note that my talk is not a replacement to actually connect to the community of users with disabilities or players with disabilities in our case. I'm myself on the neurodiverse spectrum, but I do not represent the entire community and their individual input, which is like super valuable. So see this rather as a catalyst to get interested and to buy into the topic and to hopefully get motivated to get started with this. First, I want to talk about real quick, like, what is accessibility? And we're at the World Usability Day, right? So accessibility comes from the adjective accessible, meaning something that is easy to be understood, easy to be reached, or also easy to be used. And so in our context of the World Usability Day, accessibility for me also means usability for all. And the all part is really what matters. And here's also the complexity where the complexity of accessibility really lies. It's the all part. So products and services should be usable and enjoyable by everyone, regardless of their individual interaction conditions and experience. So in practice, this could mean you provide options, you provide settings, you provide features that just make certain aspects of the experience that we craft not just easier, but in some cases even entirely possible and therefore accessible. But why is this actually important? I mean, it's kind of very meta to throw this into a room full of full of usability professionals. So why is usability and accessibility so important? Well, the list is rather long. And I just typed a couple of things down from the top of my head. This is not everything. We want to provide equality and equity for people with disabilities. We want to break the cycle of decreased quality of life. We want to make our products and services accessible because they're beneficial for everyone, not just for people with disabilities. We want to facilitate innovation and new standards. Or also like the credo of UX design, like if a user's experience is bad or if someone cannot use anything, a design is just simply insufficient. And also the fact that our interaction experience is going to change a lot as we age. Most disabilities are also developed with older age. So that's also a very, very important thing to think about. So the list is very, very long, why you should care. But there's also, like, I get it. Sometimes you know all these things and you want to make change happen or run into obstacles. And I want to give you the tools how to tackle that as well. Because something a lot of people are not aware of are that there's actually accessibility laws as well. So accessibility laws, you might be aware that they exist. But sorry, I just got so distracted by that noise. I'm not entirely sure what it is, but yeah. Accessibility laws. If you oversee these things, things can get very, very, expensive very fast, especially if you're operating on a global level. These are just 3 of the accessibility laws that exist. Many countries have them. The US has the Americans with Disabilities Act. Canada has the Accessible Canada Act. And also the EU has the European Accessibility Act, which is official since 2019. It's going to be, I think by 2022, the member states have to introduce it into their federal laws. And then by 2025, which is not very far away, considering that it's almost 2022, it's going to be enforced, which means that by then you can get sued and fined for providing non-accessible solutions. So this is very much a reality. And even though the other reasons should already be enough, this is also a reason why you should care. So how do we get there? I want to talk about accessibility as a mindset, because yes, I could just start to get into the matter and just provide you a lot of like links and resources, which I'm going to do, by the way, to guidelines and to actual implementations. But the most crucial thing and the biggest challenge, but also the most sustainable approach to make accessibility happen is actually to develop a mindset about it. Because, spoiler alert, it doesn't just happen. It needs to be incorporated in how we think and how we make decisions, no matter how big and small, every day. So if you decide on how something should work, so if you're a designer, a product owner, a project manager, anything in that regard, that is something that you should consider in your thinking process. But we know about this, right? Accessibility is not a new topic. There has been a lot in like literature and in academia and everything. It has been a buzzword for many years. So why is this not already the case? Like, why are there such few solutions out there and the standard didn't change yet? Something that we know from our own like psychological behavior is that we unconsciously make decisions that are heavily influenced by our own bias. So that bias comes from our own personal experience. So we make a judgment on something that is rather based on our experience and beliefs rather than what is actually happening. Without wanting to go deep into the matter of why we adapt certain biases and how that happens, it's just something we need to be aware of. And something we got to acknowledge is that, and I think that's, the core of UX practitioning, that's literally the reason why our profession even exists, is that our own experience is not everyone else's experience. And I think you can all agree with that. And on top of that, there's the factor of, it's rather a social factor, which I'm also going to talk about in a bit more. We tend to surround ourselves with people that are similar to us. So we don't really know what's out there. We have a very biased view on the world, just very, very inherently. So put that all together and the result is just inaccessible design decisions. But my talk is not aimed at like telling us or telling you or telling myself how bad we are at these things and how bad our biases are, or that we're basically ignorant towards many factors. There is a big gap in education right now. And I feel like as an industry, it is very much our task to create awareness and demand for it in order to motivate people to get into that matter. And as Christiane said earlier in the introduction, for us, this is very, very, very important at Ubisoft. Accessibility is on the top of our priority list. And hopefully that's motivating, future people who want to get into this industry to also inform themselves about accessibility. Everything you really need, like you don't need a certification, you don't need a big lecture, and you don't need like years of experience. Like, yes, at some point that's going to be really good, but the prerequisite for getting to know about accessibility really is just an open mind and the willingness to learn, also to unlearn your thought patterns and how to be empathetic. Empathy is how you do it, but it's not why you do it. And that is a very, very important distinction, because with empathy, you very much get into a slippery slope of, patronizing, sort of pity, sort of charity behavior, and that is not the reason why we do it. It's more about empowerment and our responsibility towards the community. And that is super, super important to just distinguish. And by doing that, we're simply going to create better solutions at the end of the day. Something else you need to think about is that our generation is very tech savvy and very tech dependent. I don't think there's, or I can just speak for myself here, but I couldn't imagine living without my PC, without my smartphone. It's not like the currently older generation that has to be, okay, you're going to show your grandma a smartphone and tell her, oh, grandma, this is really cool to use. You can call me and you can, you know, set yourself a reminder for your medication. It's not like that. We want to continue using that technology when we're older. And the more we invest in accessible solutions now, the more and the better solutions we're going to have when we're older. The demand is naturally just going to rise. So this is also like a very, you know, future-oriented decision. All right, let's get to the next point. I want to talk about society and people with disabilities. This is not something that is usually on the agenda of like usability talks, but for me as a designer, it's very, very important to understand the impact and to understand why we do certain things and what impact our decisions have on people, like really, like every day. And that also means we have to talk about the bigger picture, which is society. So first of all, I want us to acknowledge that people with disabilities are often stereotyped. When I talk about people with disabilities, you might think about a person in a wheelchair, or you might think about Braille script, you might think about crutches, you might think about a guide dog, or the white canes that people who are blind use to, you know, walk and to orient themselves, or you might think about sign language, any of these things. But I want you to know that these things are very, very, very like small bits and bobs out of the lives of people with disabilities. And it also does not mean this is all the disabilities they are. This is how the picture actually looks like. It's just a small part. How a disability really looks like is a very complex and a very individual question. It's also a consequence of society. What was that? I'm sorry.
He already left the call. Go on, Ella.
Oh my God.
Sorry for the disruption.
Okay, that's terrible. All right. Where were we? So as a consequence of people with disability staying invisible, where was I? I'm sorry, I completely lost my trail of thought. Okay, let me just center myself. They cannot partake independently in our society. And this is very much a cycle, right? Therefore, a lot of people also don't know that they might have a disability. Also, some disabilities are completely invisible and you're never going to like see them from the outside. So people cannot partake in everyday life, society, etc. But is that really their fault? Isn't it actually our fault that they cannot do that? And we come to the most important message of my talk, which is talking about the environment we create with our design decisions. So it's the environment we create that makes people with disabilities feel disabled. And I want you to really let that sink in, because this is turning the whole thing around. This is also very much corresponding what we do in UX. Like, it's never the user's fault. It's always our design decisions that lead to confusion or to not being able to do certain things. So as UX practitioners, this is the first thing you learn. So it very much lines up with what we do on a every single day basis. Let me elaborate this. I want to talk about a super cool YouTuber. Her name is Molly Berg. She does like lifestyle and fashion and makeup, and she describes herself as the typical sushi and makeup loving millennial who just happens to be blind. And she's really terrific and wonderful. I don't remember the video that I watched because it was not about that, but in like some sort of side note, she talked about her house, and she talked about how how comfortable she feels in her house and how much she loves it. And then she said something like, okay, in my own house, I just don't feel disabled. I feel very comfortable and in control. But when I go out, when I leave my house, that's where things suddenly make me feel disabled. And for me, that was one of these like mind-blowing eureka moments. It was like, yes, girl, not you are the problem. It's the environment that is the problem, the environment that we make. So you realize that this is a cycle, right? So able-bodied people create environments for able-bodied people, and people who don't belong into that group, they don't even get the chance to get into a position where they could change or challenge or do anything about that, basically. So it's just self-perpetuating. And the saddest part is actually that we miss out on so many humans being able to contribute to our, not just society, but also in our industries. Like we miss out on so much talent as the result of an inaccessible environment. And we really need to ask ourselves how many extremely talented and smart people who never get to live up to their full potential are actually out there. So this is really the core message of diversity and inclusion. And as inspiring as it sounds, I want you to realize, and I want you to make sure that you know that this is not about inspiring. This is very real obstacles that people face every single day of their lives. And that, to me, is very tragic. And that's something that we really need to radically change. But because I work in the video game industry, I want to like quickly talk about video games and players with disabilities as like a little bit of a topic that is related to the societal topic, and something that is important to us as a company as well. I want to open up with another YouTuber. His name is James Rath. He's a legally blind filmmaker, accessibility activist, and speaker. He's absolutely terrific. I highly recommend his tech reviews. They're really, really insightful and cool. And he's confronted with like comments like, oh, video games, are these even made for you? Like, do you really like, there's a lot of very cruel commentary online on this topic where other players say, oh, okay, this type of game or this game at all or games at all is not made for this type of person. I mean, as a woman, we do face these sort of comments as well, but people with disabilities have also like a lot to do with that sort of game elitism. And what do you say when you read something like this? Like, you're often confronted with very one-dimensional, very ableist arguments. And those are really, like, sometimes they're really hard to counter because what do you even say? So James, who has to face these comments every single day as well, came up with like a really, really cool metaphor that I want to tell you about, because he says something along the lines of, okay, listen, I'm blind. I should never drive a car. Like, just a bad idea. I should not drive a car. I'm going to get seriously hurt. I'm going to probably seriously hurt other people. But just because I can't drive myself, it doesn't mean that I can never go near a car. It doesn't mean that I cannot like cars. It doesn't mean that I can't get on the passenger seat and have someone else drive. It also doesn't mean that I can't get into an Uber, and it doesn't mean that I can't facilitate a car to get from A to B. So even if I cannot drive myself, it doesn't mean I have to fully deprive myself of like the car convenience and experience, right? And this is really something, especially in the video game industry, that is like so crucial, because video games are experienced in so many different ways. Like, every player has a certain aspect of a game that they really love, or certain things that they really like doing. So we craft those experiences that are, versatile and very, very individual. Also, the fact that video games are a global phenomenon and have reached critical mass, this is really good for us because we're really growing fast as an industry, because we are so mainstream now, and we shape the lives of so many people. And on top of that, we also have the technology and the resources to make games accessible. So this is not at all about competing. Or playing like the game in the hardcore mode. This is about facilitating fun and making it possible for all our players to experience a game and the story that it tells, because we are storytellers and we make players feel accomplished with what they achieve in our games. And that's something we can do in so many different ways. So video games evidently have a positive impact on our players, and they increase quality of life. So for people with disabilities, this is arguably even more crucial, to have a medium that allows them to not just escape, but to also feel very comfortable and accomplished with. All right, here's some resources. I'm gonna copy them on the Miro board where you can get started if you code games or make games and you wanna know where to start, how to make your games accessible. It goes from blogs to guidelines, to principles. You don't have to reinvent the wheel. There's so much already out there. There's, the IGDA YouTube channel where there's like so many talks about, video games and games accessibility. And I also have some other resources that you can check out. Those are more rather about web accessibility, but all these rules and principles are very transferable. So even if something is written for video games, you can still utilize that for whatever you're making, like whatever product or service you're developing. There's always something to take away from there. And as the last part of my talk, I really quickly want to talk about universal design, just because I want to tie it all back together to, the World Usability Day, and going back into more of a design aspect of how to make accessibility happen. Universal designs is defined as the following. It's design that's usable by all people to the greatest extent possible without the need for adaptation or specialized design. Now, something I want to note here is that adapted or specialized design is always something you're going to have to facilitate to some degree. So there's not, there's very, very justified use cases for this too. So this doesn't mean that universal design is going to solve all your problems. Universal design, however, gives you a very broad base, and it incorporates a very broad spectrum of users or players who are able to use whatever you're making, whatever your experience you're crafting. So taking this as a foundation and a basis is a really, really good idea. Why is this so good? Accessibility is often seen as something extra, like something that is added on top of something. It's often, seen as hard, therefore, as well, something that costs extra money and extra resources. But that's what universal design seeks to solve, because universal design says, hey, accessibility is not like a separate thing. It's just part of the whole. It's part of the whole experience. Accessibility is often added in hindsight, as just said. So it's adding complexity to an existing non-accessible system, which is super inefficient and super ineffective and also very costly. Imagine I built a skyscraper, and the skyscraper has 100 levels, and I, make the walls, I paint the walls, I put the windows in, I put the doors in, I furnish all the rooms, I put the flowers on the table, I polish everything. Everything looks super pretty and perfect. And then suddenly I realize, oh, I forgot to build in an elevator. Well, that's bad. So you have to break through all your already done rooms to make that elevator happen, which is obviously messing up a lot of the foundation you already built. So you can already see it would have been much easier to just plan that from the beginning and then to furnish your rooms accordingly to that. Something we also need to be aware of is that special solutions are further stigmatizing. So to make a special solution is then again separating people from a design or an experience that they just want to experience like really anybody else. So keep that in mind as well. And something else to keep in mind is that not only people with disabilities profit from accessible solutions. So planning, research, analysis, everything you start your designs with starts with accessibility in mind. And you can lay a very, very broad foundation for this. Something that you all should be very familiar with is the user-centered design cycle. And that user experience is like a very iterative process. So you start with the analysis, then whatever you're benchmarking and doing is going into, the design. And then also you have the evaluation phase, which is where you match your intent with your impact. And whilst you can already do a lot of work beforehand at your analysis, and you can really already take care of a lot of accessibility issues you might face later, the evaluation phase is also where you can do a lot. And to evaluate your designs, you test it with users. If you're into data science, or if you're somehow familiar with data and statistics, you might be aware that sample quality is everything. So your sample quality really decides the quality of your results and how representative they are. If I'm the mayor, imagine I'm the mayor of a town, right? And I ask 100 people, I want to find out if my town is safe. I ask 100 people if they feel safe walking home at night. And all these 100 people tell me, yeah, they feel super safe. And I'm like, wow, I'm such a great mayor. My town is so safe. And then you look at the demographic of your sample, and it just so happens that 100 men answered the survey and not a single woman or a non-binary person. So your result is quite naturally skewed and not represent, because your sample doesn't represent the actual population. So if you do a usability test and you test with 20 people with perfect eyesight, no one of them is going to tell you whether your contrast is high enough. No one's going to tell you if your font is big enough. No one's going to tell you if this is color blind friendly. All these things you just never get to find out, because your sample does not correspond to the actual population out there. And according to the WHO, 15 to 20% of our world population are having a disability of some sort. Just to, provide you some sort of number here. So yeah, accessibility testing is your tool for real representative data and insight. So only by including people with different abilities, you get representative usability test results. So when you plan your next user test, definitely keep that in mind. And we're at the end of the talk. So I want to quote my wonderful colleague, Cherry Thompson. They are Ubisoft Accessibility Project Manager in Canada. And they gave a terrific talk at GA-Conf this year about, pausing, peering into the distance, be like, okay, where is accessibility in games right now and where do we go? The question you really want to ask yourself, and that's not even just specific to accessibility, is whenever you design, whenever you craft an experience, and whatever you do in your position as a decision maker, is look at how do we do this and ask yourself, how do we do it better? And that's pretty much it. All right, I hope I could give you some meaningful insight and input, and maybe you learned a thing or two. And if you have any further questions, I'm going to be in the Wonder Room later on as well. So I'm happy to take care of your questions in any way. And yeah, I'm super excited to hear from you. Thank you so much for listening. And I hope you have a wonderful World Usability Day.
Okay, now I could unmute myself. Thanks, Johannes. So yeah, thank you for this very inspiring talk. It again also made me think, how can I bring that directly into work? So Johannes, do we have questions on Slido? I've seen that we have some hands raising from the people on the Zoom call as well. So yeah, maybe we start with the first question and then we come to Boris. So maybe we go forth and back a little bit. So it upvoted was, when is budget so small? What would be the bare minimum to aim for in accessibility? Do you have any experience on that?
Yeah, so something you can facilitate here are the WCAG guidelines. There are certain tiers that you can look at. There's A, AA, and AAA, meaning those are the levels of accessibility you provide. You can look at as a start, you can look at the requirements for the 1A, which is really a bare minimum. Often you should aim for the AA. So there's very, very specific things that you can do and provide to make sure that things are accessible. Like it's all very, very fleshed out already, especially from the web accessibility guidelines, and that is transferable to any sort of system or service that you're making. So I would really start there. I also want to say, as said, like it's often seen as hard because it's seen as something extra. Often it's just like something you need to be aware of. It's a design decision you make. So it's not adding any complexity. It's just something that you change or do. Instead of like not having it in mind. But yeah, start with the WCAG guidelines. Those are the best way to start for sure.
So then we come to Peter. He also asked the question that was upvoted. The gaming industry hosted some of the most abhorrent cases of exclusion and harassment. Do you think they have a responsibility to counter that, and how? So what can we do about that, or what can game industry do about that in the future?
All right. I'm really here to talk about usability and to talk about accessibility today. I am not, if you have any questions in regards to that, I really would want you to contact our PR department for that. I think it's not very relevant for our talk today.
Yeah, I think past is past, and what you are trying to kind of motivate us is to change the future. So I think
I wanna motivate you all to become better designers.
Okay, yeah, I think time is also almost over, and we don't want to delay too much the other talks. Maybe Ella, if you're still feeling well later on this evening, you will be joining our Wonder discussion, and then everyone who did not yet have the chance to ask his or her question, if you are in the Wonder Room, please feel free to walk up to Ella and search a conversation with her. Thanks for coming today and giving us this inspirational talk.
Of course, anytime. I'm happy to be here. I hope you all have a wonderful day. And
thank you.
Looking forward.
Yeah, thank you for this great talk, and sorry for having me to put up these restrictions to the Zoom call. I think there are a few people or were on the call that I had to report. I usually don't have to do this, so I'm sorry for anything that happened here, and I hope that the interruptions are over now. But since we are going forward in our agenda and have a next great talk, I want to introduce Thomas from Linz. He is not only the CEO from UXfocus, a company placed in Linz, but also one of the main people behind UX Linz, also kind of a similar community, not to say the same as we have here in Graz from UX Graz. I have to ask you to unmute due to the restriction now. So welcome, Thomas. Thanks for being here today. And I think I say it's the most important parts. So go on with the talk. And again, for everyone who wants to ask questions, feel free to put them on Slido. I will repost the link for you, and we will ask the question on here afterwards. Welcome, Thomas.
Hello, Johannes. Thanks for introducing me, and thanks for the nice words and also for unmuting me. So, yeah, as our Johannes already said, I'm here, Thomas from Linz, where we are basically doing the UX consulting and design services in the middle of Austria, so between Salzburg and Vienna. And I want to talk today about a topic that I showed to you now. It's about building a little bit of trust and what influences trust and what is relevant for designers in order also to build systems that we can trust, that are good to use and that people love to use. And Yes, in order to start, I came up with 2 sentences. Basically, I really thought about, why trust. I did a lot of research actually, where I investigated in a lot of trust models, trust patterns that we created, and I really thought, why do we do that? It's basically one thing that for every product design, for every product that we design, being an app, a digital app, a website, any tool, from an app to a screwdriver, whatever, you need to trust the tool. You need to trust the product so that you really will use it. If you don't trust your screwdriver because you fear that it breaks and that you hurt yourself, you will have a big problem and that product just won't sell. And on the other hand, it not only might not sell, it might also be dangerous then for people, for their safety, regarding the safety, for their body and for health issues. I already mentioned there are some ways how trust comes up. Usually you're starting, if you're addressing a product with some initial trust, that means you're coming up with a specific level of trust when you're targeting a product, being in a banking app, being in a website, which changes, of course, during usage, during different functions, when you hear about products. And this affects, of course, the way how you use the product, how you use the systems, how you use different functions, and of course also how long you use it, and if you would recommend it further, which affects a lot, of course, the user experience and the system, the usability of the system itself. And in order to think about how to shape the different features and the factors that influencing the trust of the user, of the trustee, to the product, we of course need to think about what's trust actually. There was one great psychologist actually from the 60s called Julian Rutter, who investigated a lot in trust, and especially in interpersonal trust, who came up with a definition which fits really, really good also to not only to interpersonal trust, but also to trust regarding products, where he defines trust as an expectancy held by an individual or a group that the word promise, verbal or written statement of another individual, but also of another product then, if you translate it, or group, can be relied upon. What effects does this have on trusting another person? And how can we translate this to the definition and the design of the user experience of a specific product? So on a personal level, he found out that people who trust are less likely to lie, cheat, or steal. So they're more trustworthy. That means you can rely that their actions are the actions that you also expect to be. That means you have already here a good argument and a good reason how to design your workflows, your user flows, and use the information that you get, the data that you get from the people, in order to shape your product. Further, he found out that trusting people are more likely to give others a second chance. That means they're much more forgiving. Just imagine you have your product and you have errors in there. Every product has error. Every digital product has a lot of bugs inside. So if you have people who are basically trusting, they address the product in a totally different way. If they find out that the product has a specific value for them. So those who trust tend to get also to respect the rights of others. That's really, really important also regarding the usage of data, the GDPR regulations, and so on. So there are a lot of other issues. So how does this basically affect on the way how we address the users and how we target the users? 3 people, Michael Kriskovic, Saurabh Dutta, and Jay Brewer, were senior UX designers, basically investigating a lot on the trustworthiness and found out that after the research done, 3 aspects influencing the trustworthiness of the user experience itself. Basically, integrity. So you need integrity to do the job with the best intentions. Translated to the user experience of products, it's basically you need to be clear in communication. You need to be honest and transparent regarding what you want to tell your users, how you tell it, especially when you think about UX writing, the small texts in your products that guide the users on how to use the products. That's really important. Of course, you also need to show the competence, which is reflected mostly in how the system, how the product, the design matches what the user expects. And last but not least, because it's one of the most important things, basically, it's just mentioned at last, it's the capability to deliver what the user expected. It's the value. Users need to have a value from a product. I mentioned a screwdriver before, if you don't have screws at home that you need to tighten, the screwdriver won't have any value. Same for a coffee cup if you just drink tea. Of course, this can be translated to a lot of different situations, and trusting a tool, a product, is the essence of making users happy and making users want to use a product and your designs. Being it digital or not, that does not matter that much. On the first slide, I had one important point, which is patterns. Patterns are basically design patterns, so ways of how to solve specific design problems in order, to achieve a good solutions. And in the last years, the topic of dark patterns came up. So what are dark patterns and how can we, let's say, get rid of them towards patterns that have a good intention, called so-called angel patterns? Good question. So in 2010, there was a guy called Harry Brignall. The ones of you all who already typed into Google the name or just researched a little bit about dark patterns definitely know this name, because he actually was the first one defining and what dark patterns are. Basically just design patterns that are deceptive and they have one goal. They want not the best for the user, but actually they want to use the behavior and the user's cognitive and psychological interaction and patterns to mislead or trick the users, with one goal: to make them doing something that they simply didn't think of or that they just don't want to do. It's of course nothing nice and should be avoided. Harry actually did one thing. He did a lot of research. He investigated in these patterns in order to find out what they are, and he came up with a category of patterns which I briefly want to show you. So he found out that there are different types of patterns, and he gave them a nice name. So the first one is trick questions. I'm sure you all know that. It's, for example, when filling out a form, sometimes the words are really not clear and they are inverted. So the meaning is inverted, so that you're not sure what to do. One example of that is, for example, here one from Sky website, where people, designers, use opt-outs for specific functionality. So the user really has to revert the functionality of this checkbox in their mind, and they really have to do a lot of cognitive effort in order to do the right thing. And of course, a lot of people just fall into this trap and maybe check the checkbox or don't check the checkbox in the correct way. Another one is a roach motel. I think we don't have a sound here, so I just skip that, but I explain it. Roach motel pattern is basically a pattern where it's easy to get in, but really, really, really hard to get out. The ones of you who have an Amazon Premium account and wanted to cancel that, a Prime account, pardon, might have expected this scenario that you see here now, where just try it out yourself, try to cancel your Amazon Prime membership. It's really, really hard. I did it once and it took me a lot of cognitive effort and a lot of steps and a lot of iterations, where Amazon just wants to keep you for a long time on their site and just doesn't want to let you go. So you have to enter the menus twice, have to repeat a lot of confirmations and really think about what the confirmations mean. And they coming up with ugly words, actually, where they also try to convince you that you're doing something bad here. Another pattern is the sneak into the basket, where you found it out maybe yourself a lot of time when you bought some things, and suddenly when you're doing the checkout in your basket, things appear that you still didn't order. My favorite one is called Privacy Suckering, or also called the Zack, which got its name from Mark Zuckerberg, the CEO of Facebook, which is basically a pattern where you're tricked to share your private information that you simply don't want to share them publicly, and it's then used for a bad thing. Here, another type one is also, so these patterns are a lot used also in the checkout processes in shops, in e-shops and so on. So that's why these names are coming from, and these categories are coming from, like price comparison prevention, where users are just hindered to compare different prices of different options in order to guide them to a specific option to use. I won't go into all of them, but one or two important of them. So misdirection is also one in your dark pattern, which is quite bad. For example, here we have a small example from here. Just imagine you book a flight and the airline website just really wants to sell you your insurance, and the option not to buy this insurance is just really hidden in some submenu, in some drop-down list, where you have here, for example, in the drop-down list where you select the country of residence, an option for no travel insurance needed. One really bad dark pattern is that you turn the existing functionality into another one. There's a example from a well-known system called Windows 10, where I think it was in 2016, they already had a dialogue where you could upgrade to Windows 10 actually, which is nothing bad if you press OK and yes. But what they really did here is when you close the dialog with the X, so with the close button, they upgraded your system. So they used an existing well-known pattern for another functionality in order to really trick the users. Other categories, one which comes and is basically quite well known from the topic of UX writing, is also confirm shaming. I'm sure you all know that. So if you want to buy something and you ask, do you want to take this account? You just have to type in your email or give us the data or allow us to use the data for some advertisement. And then the no option just says, okay, you're bad, you like to pay more. So giving you a bad feeling of pressing it with really shaming the user. These guys ads, these are, I'm sure you're a lot of UX designers and everybody was already looking for some icons somewhere in the internet, and you came to the site where you could download them. And there you found a lot of download buttons which are basically marked as ads a lot of times. So this type of dark pattern is called disguised ads. It goes on to forced continuity, you all know that. So if you just take an account in order to try out the software, and the software is continuing automatically without canceling itself after a specific trial period, and you just get your bill then for the next period or for the next year or whatever, and this is called forced continuity. So there are a lot of different pattern categories, definitely not all of them. So there are which add up and add up, and here you have a small overview about the different categories that are used in different scenarios, matched to the different categories. So we have a lot of them stemming, of course, from web shops where people trick users in order to buy something and come up. Of course, there's also standard patterns like this inverted slider from Oracle, which where you slide up, it gets worse, reverse. You only have the required cookies. That means the more the slider is, the lower is the category. Or one, for those who have an iPhone, you have here a small example of the iPhone where you just can't get rid of this iPhone storage almost full message until you really buy more storage, which is quite annoying. And of course, we want to come over this and just avoid these patterns in order not to lose the customers and not to make the customers annoyed, because that would reduce the trust to the system. And if you have a customer who is annoyed about your product, they won't come back, and the trustworthiness and the trust function just goes down, and it's really, really hard to recover the trust. So one method is, of course, transforming these dark patterns into so-called angel patterns, but just modifying them a little bit. The modification is basically the intention that you have. So the intention that the designer has with these different patterns. So for example, if you have a dark pattern for trick questions, you can change that to a treat question. So this have a small example. So from a dashboard, which is proactive, where you have the system telling the user, hey, you're making a PDF, you're making this export every week. Should I do this automatically from you? So the system reacts to the way how the users behave, and it provides some proactive solutions with a good intention. Same for for the Roach model, just make a data spa of it. That means you have a pool somewhere where you can easily access the data and you have all the functionality easily accessible. It's the intention that you have when which changes. There doesn't need to be too many changes in the UI and the way how they are done. It's just sometimes a word that you change or an area where you put the information. Same for if you have a web shop and you have some hidden costs. So maybe if you go to your internet shop, you usually have also a service fee that you need to pay. They're usually not listed there in this price list. Make this explicit at a specific stage in order to avoid users to be annoyed because suddenly at the end of the checkout, they would have a higher amount to pay. And so on. There are a lot of ways using transparency of information, using good design strategies, and maybe a specific code of conduct for UX designers that guides the designer then into the right direction. So it's about how designers can restore the faith in the product in order to make the product trustworthy for the specific users. Designers should have the goal, a design goal, to make the problems truthful and transparent. So transparency of data, transparency of information is one of the keys in order to make products trustworthy. And of course, all the functionality that you put in should have an added value for the users, for the people, in order to make it not only trustworthy, but also valuable to use, which also would increase then the willingness to use the tool and the product accordingly. So really try to get rid of these trust patterns and try to change them towards a design that implements a good intention. Yeah, how do we do that? First, of course, we need to identify what they are. For this, we have a small look at the topic of ethics and ethical UX. There's a nice white paper that you can download from 2020, so not too old actually, where ethics in design from an organizational point of view is covered, where they really separate this in a 3-step process. It's regarding the attention that users need to put on doing something good, basically. Because if you as a UX designer are not attentive, it might happen to you easily that you're using some dark patterns, using some methods, some design approaches, which are resulting in a bad UI for the users because you're just simply not putting the attention of it. The second one is construal, so it's about the individual's behavior, which could be interpreted somehow. So drawing the perspectives, laying out the context, and using the specific frameworks that also show which ethical decisions are taken, like how to address GDPR issues, how to make the data transparent, and so on, and also showing how to involve the stakeholders. But keep in mind, this is from an organizational point of view, and of course, you need also then to increase the motivation then in the system. So that's what we're making immediately the shift to in taking all this information from this organizational point of view towards the view of the designer, UX designer. There we can identify 3 different points which are important. It's about existential values. If you as a UX designer don't want to make weapons, you shouldn't do that. If you don't have the intention to do something bad and do something that you don't want to do, don't do that. So really stay to your values that you have and match them with the products that you make, of course. The second one is ill or misdirected intent. So the most of the designers have a good intent. They want to make cool products for users that users love, that are really nice, and a lot of cool designers have really cool capabilities of doing that. Of course, sometimes the problem is also that they're just not allowed to do that. In their company structure, in their organizational institution, a lot of hurdles come up, which is basically put here in this bubble of the ill or misdirected intent, where they are more or less hindered in order to design it towards a trustworthy system. And of course, really important is this benevolent intent. So the UX designers should avoid dark patterns, should go towards designing a trustworthy system. This framework basically was put up by Chris Keys, who is a principal UX designer for a lot of time in the healthcare industry, who really investigated a lot, especially in the healthcare industry, in these different intentions in order to make products good and useful, and of course also safe for people. Good, so we have now, of course, our framework, how we should behave, how we should set our goals. As a UX designer, you should have, of course, the intention to do something good. So you need some tools in order to evaluate whether what you decide, what you do is good or bad. So there, what might help you here is one point, which defines, so it's from Daniel Berdichevsky and Eric Neuschwanner. It's already more than 10 years old, this framework, this golden rule of persuasion. They investigate a lot of persuasive technology, persuasive design, where they set up a framework on how to evaluate and basically if an activity, an action is ethically okay or not okay. So if you're breaching the border between persuasion and manipulation, where the intention is one of the first points. So they're evaluating the outcome, and if your intention is bad and you intentionally made a bad design, then you're going using dark patterns, then you would go more towards the direction of manipulation. So if you can answer all these three questions, if the intention it's intended or not, if it's reasonably predictable or not, and if it's ethical or unethical with a yes, then you can assume that the outcome, the design that you make is positive. There's one nice book and one model from Nia Eyal, actually called Hooked, where he defined the Hooked model, which is defined as a method actually for building habit-forming products, which is based on the power of persuasion and manipulation. So he doesn't differentiate between it because he leaves out the discussion whether it's good or bad and the intention is good or bad, but he's more focusing on the effect. But he already realized, of course, that it can be misused. That's why he also gave one cool matrix, a so-called manipulation matrix, where he has two categories, two categories basically, which is materiality, if it improves the user's life, or if it doesn't. On the other hand, if the maker would use it itself, so you as a UX designer would use the system itself, or you wouldn't use it. So if you have a good intention, then you're on the right upper right corner, then you're more a facilitator, you have a good intention in mind, you're using persuasive technology with a good intention. That means you would strive much more for these angel patterns. Where Peddler is basically one of designers who is using some UX elements, maybe with a not too good intention, but he is aware that he wouldn't use it himself, so he's not striving for that intention. So if you think about these 3 bubbles before, the first bubble is not that good film. The dealer wants basically to make money, so he's more interested in making them, making products that bring money. And the entertainer in the section basically regards more to products that make fun. We had before the talk with games, where we can take a lot of gamification approaches in order to use and to guide the user to specific directions. So it's about manipulation, which could be used, manipulation techniques, which could be used for a good or bad intention. And this gives you then a hint if it's manipulation or more a persuasive intent in order to design your products. This is just an overview of a nice poster actually that you can download. You have the link there. It's from the persuasive, with a lot of persuasive patterns that could be used. So keep in mind, the difference is the intention behind it. It's about the persuasion. If you're thinking towards persuasion, it's you have a good intention and you don't want to trick people, you want to help people, and this supports you to go towards well, moral code, which results maybe as a first approach, maybe it's a conduct for designers where they could respect the autonomy of the user, where it's beneficence which drives the app, the service towards the best interest, the best value for the users, and you really try not to use dark patterns, non-maleficence and utility, increase their values, and justice. Keep in mind that you're responsible for the data that you're collecting, that you're using, and do something good with it in order to keep trust. Thank you.
Thank you for this really, really great talk. I know it was a little bit over time, but due to the interruptions of the first part, I think that's totally fine. And we have some time left in the break in between. I hope it's okay for the speaker afterwards. But even though we are already over time, I think that there is time for at least one question, because there are a lot of really interesting questions here. And I just picked the most upvoted one, which seems interesting to a lot of the people in here. And the question was, do the common cookie exception cards on websites fall in the category of dark patterns? Maybe you can explain something around this.
Before explaining something, I would say not all of them, but the most of them are using dark patterns in order to drive the user towards the direction of just accepting all the patterns, which is not the intention of the users, not at all. And it's less about showing them the values of the cookies. You really have to dig into some settings somewhere and have to put a lot of effort in order to see the values that the cookies bring, and which is a lot of work. And if we find ways of extracting the positive things and showing them to the user in a better way, then we could drive them more, provide them a better feeling about just clicking this OK for and accept all cookies, which would be beneficial.
Okay, I think we can go in depth with the other questions in the networking afterwards. You will join the networking, so we will have the chance to get more insights on that. I hope that's fine for everyone who asked us really great questions in here, but we're a little bit over time. So thanks again for the talk, and I have to put you off stage, and I will ask now Konrad, maybe you can turn on your camera, and also Peter. Oh, Peter, I already see you here. And Konrad, you're up as well. And I welcome you on stage. So now we move on forward to from Linz to Graz/Vienna. So it's really, again, an amazing experience to have all these communities joining in here tonight. Thanks for joining us here, and really great to have the University of Applied Sciences of Graz joining us. So I hand over to you, Konrad, and the stage is all yours. So welcome. And
thank you, Johannes, for the great introduction. And I would like to welcome Peter Purgathofer. I've made a little mind map, which I always like to do. And this gives you some overview because I don't want to get a lot of talking time. Peter Purgathofer is associate professor at the Vienna University of Technology. He's one of the most inspirational people I know. I know him for about 20 years as a teacher, supervisor, and later on also as a colleague and friend. And his research areas cover user-centered system design, digital games, informatics and society. So it reads like a summary of what we are doing here. And his talks are always very inspirational, whether they be formal or informal, in the context of university or just sitting in a cafe together. So please join me in welcoming a talk by Peter Purgathofer, and I give over to you, Peter.
I actually blushed. I'm sorry. Thank you for the kind words for the introduction. And let me just say that whoever put together this program is a genius because of the way the three topics interact with each other. I more or less start where the speaker just before me came to in the end. I want to talk about the values of UX, which might be a bit of a larger perspective on what we're doing here. So let me start with saying that manifestos have been a central part of design for as long as there was design. So the idea of things being designed by professionals is something that is not that old, maybe 100 years, maybe a little bit more. So that people are actually responsible for the design of a thing and not for its making. That's quite new. And more or less since then, people have been writing manifestos. So the oldest design manifesto I found was written by Adolf Loos. It's called Ornament and Verbrechen. And it is actually quite questionable when you think about it. And it's a bit elite and not very inclusive at all. So that is Adolf Loos. So maybe he doesn't even look too inclusive, but then again, he was an absolute innovator in the area of architecture, and we could not imagine what the world would look without people like him. So this is, for example, the room where where Karl May worked. So this is some typical room around the turn from the 18th to the 19th to the 20th century. And then when you compare it with something that Adolf Loos built, it looks like this. I'm sorry for the, so this is very different. This is obviously something that is much more modern, how we would call it now, and much more contemporary. And he was just against all kinds of ornament and wrote this manifest. We have, as I said, a long tradition of manifests. So one of the most famous manifests in design is the First Things First manifesto, where Ken Garland and 20 other designers and photographers and students wrote a manifesto that marked the turn into a world where consumerism is at the center. And they were against this influence. They said that the assertion that design is not a net neutral value-free process. So if we design something, we do not just make it beautiful for whatever reasons it needs to be beautiful, but we make it beautiful because it has a purpose in the world. And if this purpose is nefarious and if it's unethical, then we should just not design it. So there is actually a follow-up, First Things First 2000 manifesto that was basically taking the same stance, but in a more modern. So designers should be critical and take a stand in their choice of work, for instance, by not promoting industries and products perceived to be harmful. So don't do cigarette packages, don't design arms. Now, what are the materials of UX designers? Because I'm trying to get to one of my central theses here. UX designers, of course, work a lot with, I would say, the pixel at the least, the smallest material, the prime material of the graphic designer when it comes to screen design. But we know that UX is much more than pixels and much more than screen design, graphic design. The placement of your OK and cancel buttons and the signature color of your app are important things in design, but UX design is much more. So I would, for example, say that a screen like that has a hamburger menu, as we call it by now. The question whether we should have a hamburger menu or not have a hamburger menu, so there's an alternative design without the hamburger menu. There has been a lot of discussion, I think very interesting discussion, but it shows that it's not just the pixels, it's the way the things we use organize information and organize interactivity. So for example, a couple of years ago, 1994, it's a lot of years ago actually, Nathan Shedroff wrote something like the unified field theory of design and said the material is the continuum of interactivity. I think this is a very interesting view because the main material that we use is an immaterial material. So I have to promote and point out that I always argued that UX is really the core of software engineering. I'm a bit proud of this article, which came out in 2006 and asks if informatics as a whole is not a design discipline, a discipline that centers completely around design question, because everything we do here in informatics is human-made. There's no natural science here. There's no phenomena that we just look at. It's everything is person-made, and by being person-made, it's probably a design discipline because that's all we think about. So I always argued that the outer layer of a product is not all we should do. You know, if you make software first and find people later to make it usable, you end up in this situation where we can make a nice icing for a cake, but we cannot really influence what is inside anymore. So if the inside looks like this, the cake will not be good, even if the icing is very, very good. So the thesis here is that UX is in the end responsible for the whole package. You cannot ignore what the technology people do and just think that you can fix it with a nice package. We all know that that it's about the whole package, and because it's about the whole package, we should be responsible for the whole package. And the whole package includes algorithms today. And I'm going to talk about what an algorithm is and why I think it is a material for UX designers in a moment. But let me first pose, okay, there are different examples of things that could be inside, but let me first pose that algorithms will become the most important design material of UX designers in the future. So what is an algorithm? For the purpose of this talk, it is enough to look at an algorithm as a black box where something goes in and something else comes out, and the black box facilitates this transition from input to output, but we do not need to know what goes on in there for the moment. We can envision a person executing the algorithm. We can envision dwarfs or elves. We can envision a computer executing the black box, but that doesn't matter because for us, the algorithm is what happens inside that black box, what turns the input into the output. The fact that it is a black box is because we cannot look inside. So for example, a very simple algorithm would be something like that. We know that that's a piece of code and it's an algorithm that does something very simple. That's a very complex algorithm. That's a visualization of the recommendation algorithm of Netflix, for example. That's quite a number of nodes and connections there. So if we go back to the idea that an algorithm is a black box, we tend to assume that an algorithm, because it's usually carried out by a machine and it has to be written down in a very structured and mathematical, almost mathematical way, there is this assumption that algorithms are objective or neutral. They are not concerned. Because whenever a person does something, they are concerned. They tend to partake in whatever goes on, but the computers, they don't partake. They don't care, basically. So we see them as objective. And the very term algorithm itself by now suggests that this is the case, but it's not true. Algorithms can have bias, just like humans have biases. And that's what I'm going to spend some time upon explaining so that we can draw some conclusions. So one of the things I want to say is that every algorithmic bias is there for a reason. There is a reason why it is there. And I want to give you some examples and maybe try to find out what the reason for the specific algorithmic bias is. So let's look at a picture like this. These are 2 Google search results. And please mind that, of course, when I do Google image searches and then do a screenshot, and I did these myself, then the result you come up with today might be different because Google is not a fixed thing, but it changes all the time. So we can see here 2 different sets of female faces of women looking into the camera or somewhere else and basically being depicted. And we can ask ourselves, what are the search criteria that led to these 2 search results? So the one side, it's unprofessional hairstyles for work, and on the other side, it's professional hairstyles for work. And of course, we immediately see that there's something wrong. So on the one side, we have only light-colored people, and on the other side, we have mostly dark-colored people. So there's something very fundamentally wrong here, which doesn't express itself in the search term, it just expresses itself in the result, in the search result. And as a quick side remark, Google image search also does not know about what we call in German the generic masculine, das generische Masculino, because when you search for professor, you're supposed to find male and female professors, which you actually don't. So Google, with this one example, Google firmly believes or shows us a world where the word professor stands for male persons. Which is somewhat of an argument today to rethink our use of language. So maybe to just frame this a little bit, studies show us that we find those search results the most realistic that meet our expectation. So if this is the expectation, and this might be the reality, then when we look for the pictures of that beach, we will probably leave the expectation side more because that's our expectation. If we find a lot of the reality pictures and none that confirm to our expectation, we will probably change our expectation. So studies show that we find search results the most realistic that meet our expectations. If we consider a search result good, then it also reinforces our expectations. And if we trust the search engine, it cannot only reinforce, but also influence our expectations to the point that we change it. So if we find a lot of these, what I here call reality pictures, and this is not really the reality, this is just a search result, then we change our expectation. And this can, of course, be damaging. This is also why there is an imperative to get us search engines and search results that show us what I would very naively now first call a good version of the world. Of course, the question of what is a good version of the world is something we will probably never agree on, but it's very clear that Google has an influence on what we think is the world. So Cory Doctorow, whom you might know, is a science fiction author and speaker in technology, wrote a great comment on dystopian science fiction recently in The Guardian. He observed that all science fiction that play out some sort of catastrophe or breakdown of the world, of the systems, always lead us into a version of a total breakdown of society. People at each other's throat like animal. And this is in stark contrast to what we time again observed in minor breakdowns, like the big New York electricity dark out. People suddenly help each other. People become very nice and support each other. And so the question is, why are these science fiction stories always telling these strange versions of the story where people get out their knife the moment the electricity goes down? And he says this is harmful because these stories tell a version of a future, and when that future happens, some people might actually confirm to that version that they read in the stories. And so search engines showing us the same picture of, for example, of men with cars and women with shoes, they cement harmful societal stereotypes. And that is something that probably is not too bad with people who have firm beliefs about the world, but those who have still malleable and changing beliefs about the world, this is very damaging. So this is an actual case of Google image search, searching for gorillas. And of course, when you scroll down, you find other example of gorillas, which some are just dark figures. And it points to a very, very deep problem in the way Google image search and Google image recognition works, but it also points to a societal problem. If our values are matured, this might not be much of a problem. We can say, oh my God, this is awful. But if you're like a kid or a juvenile and the values are still in flux, this can be quite devastating. Usually this is quickly corrected. So again, if you search for gorillas, you will probably not find any persons anymore, or I don't know, lions. But what if, but is everything corrected that we find here? What if let's just take something that is very easy to understand, which is like national identities. And there are national identities that are disputed, like Tibet or Basque or Catalan or Kurd. What about them? How if we find some mistake, we'll search for Kurds and Google tells us there are no Kurds. That would be the official Turkish version, or it shows us pictures of terrorists, which is also official Turkish version, or it shows us just people living their life, which would be probably more what the reality is. So there are problems in having services like this that are not easily and not trivially to be solved. So what is now the reason? Is it the world? Does Google, they maintain, they just show us a version of the world. The version of the world that is in the internet, that they scrap out of the internet and condense it into search result. Is this true? I don't know. So next example. This is a data set, and excuse my puny pun that I'm doing here. So this is a representation of a database, of a facial expression database. These kinds of databases full of pictures are usually used by academics who want to test their facial expression recognition. So that's why it's called a benchmark set. So you have some old software that somebody wrote that does facial expression recognition, and then you write a new version because you have this incredible idea about how facial expression could work, and then you run the same face database through it, and because every image is tagged with the facial expression that is on the picture, you can use it to benchmark which of the two pieces of software is better at recognizing facial expressions. Now, one thing that is obvious when you look at that is pretty quick that these are, I mean, I'm a man now, but behind me is also a man. There are 10 faces, of which one is a woman and 9 are men. All are more or less young. There are no kids here. There are no real grown-ups here. There are no elderly people here. So what does this mean for the software being written? It usually means that software written to do facial expression recognition works much better on male faces than on female faces. And this is actually an effect that is quite old. We know that facial recognition works better on male faces than female faces. And this is the reason. This is the reason. Inconsiderate people putting together these huge data sets, you can see down there, 16,128 pictures of 10 faces that are used for benchmarking new pieces of software, which just don't represent the world. So a very quick an excursion into another famous example, which is ImageNet. ImageNet is a database that contains hundreds and thousands of images, millions of images, really. So, and it contains all these pictures, again, tagged with what is on the picture. Now we can ask ourselves, who tags millions of pictures with what is on the picture? Like, I don't know, this is a dog or a house, or it's a dog eating, whatever. So, but this image set exists. And when we look into how this came together, you can find in an article in The Guardian that so it's 14 million photographs, mind-blowing. Most of the objects, but also mostly of objects, but also of humans, have been classified and labeled by legions of workers on Amazon's crowdsourcing labor site, Mechanical Turk. So if you know Mechanical Turk, that's a place where you can buy very cheaply mind work from people which you buy very little money. So you could say, what could possibly go wrong here? And a lot goes wrong. So it started with that somebody implemented ImageNet Roulette. And ImageNet Roulette took your picture, you could upload your picture, and then it would get labeled with the labels that were attached to people who looked similar to you. So more or less like a prediction. If your picture was in ImageNet, how would it be labeled by the Amazon Talk workers? And this is the author of an article in The Guardian. And it out came Gook and Slant Eye, which are two slurs, quite aggressive slurs for Asian people. And when you look at examples all over the net from people who did that then, this is quite ridiculous. I mean, I'm just pointing out one or the other. Some might be constructed, but I don't know. Trump was called ex-president when he was still a president. Elon Musk was labeled a demagogue. Somebody was labeled a non-smoker. I mean, how could anybody looking at a picture that you have to label deduct that you're a non-smoker? And on the top left, the rape suspect. That's very damaging. I put this picture of me and a couple of other pictures in, so pictures from when I was younger, and you can see all the things I was attributed. And this was finally with from 2 years ago, and you can see there's a version of me without beard. I was labeled as a climatologist, which is not too bad, but it's very strange. So, and this is the two people who made ImageNet Roulette, which is offline by now. I could give you example after example for what they say. Despite the common myth that AI and its data and the data it draws on are objectively and scientifically classifying the world, everywhere there's politics, ideology, prejudice, and all of the subjective stuff of history. Because in fact, all the classes, all the classification that happens of pictures are done by people. So there is no objectivity in that corner of the algorithmic world. So inconsiderate people, or is it really? I mean, can you really ask people on Amazon Turk to classify pictures of people just by looking at them? So let's have another one. This is from the year before Trump was elected to president. And this is, I just let it sink a little bit. Even the three suggested, or the first suggested, completion of your search term is awful, but I mean, look at the text that comes out, which stands out for some reason, but it is also the first result down here. What is going on here? This was 2016. This was, of course, quickly fixed. So we can go down. I will explain how all women are evil. Why are women so? This is not representing the world at all. In fact, it's the opposite. It is something that has been put there by evil people, by tampering, by manipulation. So the research around this effect turned up that there was a fake network of computers that promoted content on Google's search engine by interlinking. And you know that the number of links that point to a page, they are very important in Google search result ranking. So this network created a little part of the internet full of crap and lies and stuff like this, but they made it into Google search results on the very top. So tampering and manipulation is one of the reasons for algorithmic bias. And maybe one last thing is a very famous system, the Compass recidivism algorithm, a system that is used in the US to get a hint on what recidivism measures should be put upon somebody being let go from prison. So how dangerous are they? How probable is that they will do crime again? And after a lengthy evaluation, after this system, of course, has been used for months and years, it turned out to be heavily racist. So this Bernard Parker was found a high risk by the system, and they didn't fudge it a low risk. And it was actually exactly the other way around. So the accuracy was around the same in both cases, but where it was not accurate, it always was inaccurate in the direction of being more dangerous for people of color and less dangerous for white people. And we don't even know why, because it's an algorithm. So this is what happened later. It's an algorithm that is a closed box. So this is one of the things, for every algorithmic bias, there's a reason we might never know. Because, well, let's just jump over that. That's not that important at the moment. Because, so I said, we have a black box and an algorithm, but in reality, we have not only a black box, we have all kinds of protections so that we cannot look into that black box. We have trade secrets and copyright patents and its technical nature. The deliberate obfuscation and obscuring, even the availability. You cannot look into the source code of a piece of software like Compass because you will never see that source code. So there's one more meta problem I just want to briefly get into, and that's the negative feedback loops. So there's Homer, my good old friend Homer. Hi, Homer. And Homer just asked to have a credit at the bank. And the bank said, yeah, you can have a credit. And Homer thinks this is great and is happy. But because the bank did some credit checking behind Homer's back with data they have about him and using an AI, and by the way, an Austrian insurance company or an international insurance company operating in Austria just said they will do exactly that thing. They will do a quick examination of the data they have with a machine learning system. And because that machine learning system found that Homer is not very likely to pay back his credit, they gave him bad conditions. And that's not very good. Homer looking at the conditions is, oh, that's not good. And of course, because he gets bad conditions, he has troubles paying back the credit, the payments. And so in retrospect, this creates a circle where the AI is right in the end, but it is right because it made a bad prediction for Homer. So this is a meta problem that we have. So let me get back to the thing on hand. There's maybe one more thing I want to say. There is something that is called automation bias. We tend to believe something more when it's brought forward by a machine, when it's said by a machine, than a human being. This is just one of the ways we work, which makes an algorithmic bias all the more worse. It's not only intransparent, it's also, we believe it more. The many stories about people who get into an accident because of their navigation system tell a story about that. So we had knobs and text, we had pixels, and we had interaction as the materials of interaction designer. And I think the next step in this is actually to include the algorithms in interaction design, because in the end, we are responsible for the products we design. And if we're responsible, we have to look at the algorithms, and we have to include algorithms in design. So as for a manifesto, there's a Denver Manifesto, Values in Computing, which more or less says that we are responsible for the products we make and we create. And as UX designer, we are especially responsible. And that's it. Thank you for your attention. Let me put me here.
Thank you, Peter, for this amazing presentation, which I also see in the comments that it's not only my opinion, but by all of us. And we try to imagine an audience that is really wowed. And some asked about whether the presentation setup is secret, and I know that nothing you do paid by public money will be secret, so I'm sure you will share some.
Yeah, Secretary, but it's probably again not the point of this talk, and I can share. I'm happy to share it in the Hangout afterwards.
Yes, personally, I would like to ask whether can you tell beforehand whether your contribution will only or even mainly be used for good. Again, I did some handwritten notes, so this is that question. If you start working with a company, or if you start working in a project, can you know whether later on this might be used actually for evil or criminal or military or suppressive purpose?
No, of course not. No, you cannot know. But that doesn't alleviate you from thinking about it, whether it can be used for nefarious purposes, whether it can be used against people. And I remember when all that computer stuff began, there were companies building computers actually putting it into their terms of use. You cannot use this computer for military purposes. Of course, the work of UX designers seldom carries this kind of clauses that get active when it's used against people instead of for the well-being of people. But that doesn't mean we should not think about it, and we cannot thrive about it. I mean, think about it that way. And we've seen that in, maybe I'm making myself taller. So we've seen that in the last couple of months, technology companies have actually understood that the people working there are a rare breed, and they are very, very expensive, let's put it that way, to be replaced. And if you're expensive to be replaced, you're in a place to ask for stuff. You have an influence. And we have seen cases over the last couple of years that engineers at Amazon, at Google, and at other companies have turned that value of they now have into actual influence. I remember some company not doing facial recognition for the police and things like that. So, of course, when you're at the bottom of the hierarchy and doing only like the placement of buttons again, that's not a place where you can ask for things like that. But you can look at the company you work for. But the further you work your way through the hierarchy, and the more important you get, and the more the company relies on you doing your good work, the more you can actually ask stuff. And maybe one more sentence. I still think that as the designer, in the end, we carry most of the responsibility of what is happening, or how the product works and how the product reaches the market. So we should have influence there.
Okay, I see Max Scheugel. Welcome. Hello, Max. And you asked whether designers should learn to code. Even I know the answer. I just like to ask you, Peter.
I'm not sure about if they should learn to code, but you can learn to speak the language of coders, and you can learn to speak the language of what is now called computational thinking. So there is a specific language, and once you understand that language and the terms of that language, then you can speak with coders, even if they say things that you didn't understand before. And setting the goals of algorithms, for example, is something that can be done without being able to code.
And that we could also put that in a way that UX designers or UX responsible people should not only have empathy towards users, but also empathy towards stakeholders, and among them the programmers and the managers, of course.
That's a very good point. Yes.
Can again, Thomas is asked whether you can imagine how to integrate designing with or for algorithms in the design process.
Well, in a way, what I claim is that the design process is really the most important strand in the overall product development process. So the design process begins not when somebody has finished what the product will be, and then the design process begins, but the design process begins at the moment somebody starts working on a product. And when that happens, which has been my position for a long, long time. And when that happens, you automatically design what the algorithm should do. You design how, for example, we heard about dark patterns. Which kind of patterns are actually used, angelic patterns or dark patterns, when it's about retaining people and keeping them on your side, which is one of the reasons why we have all these troubles. The algorithms of Facebook that just fight for your attention all the time.
So we don't have any upcoming or upvoted questions from the audience. So let me ask that, since you have your slides as a background, let me put again one of mine as a in the foreground. So is there any difference between, that's actually, I wrote that before you raised that point, because I thought that while I listened to your talk that not only algorithms have an influence on important decisions, but also kind of rules like laws or informal rules or services that are designed by companies or people or society, and that lead our interaction between humans or between an individual and society. And maybe we can combine the idea of algorithms and other rules outside of the computers.
It's funny because I tend to think of policy making as a design problem. So I think basically when you create regulation, you're actually designing a future version of society or of a part of society. And when you look at it from that perspective, then you would apply design thinking in some way or another in order to reach your result. You can even ask yourself, is, for example, a regulation the right type of policy, or should we rather, I don't know, fund interesting ideas that lead us into a certain direction, or should we just put our lever on education and on maybe advertising to change people's behavior? And so in a way, these are design questions. So it makes sense to include them all into the same framework. What I would like to say, though, is that, of course, some design is faster and some is slower. So policy making usually is by definition a very, very slow process. And it should be, because its repercussions on society can be so large. You change a law, and it takes 10 years for this change in law to change something fundamentally in society. And you don't want to do that. You want to be very careful. So lawmaking or policy making is a very slow process, while other design processes are, of course, much faster.
Okay, I see that in the moment when I thought that we might need to stick to the time, Johannes appeared on the screen, and I knew that I was right in my assumption. So
Yeah.
in the
We are
name
a little
of
over
my
time.
colleague, also in the name of my colleagues and the Graz community audience and of our head of institute, Daniel Fabri, I would like to thank you, Peter, for the great talk and the time that you dedicated to us. And I would like to give back to Johannes, and we would also like to thank you and all the co-organizers for making this possible. And I look forward to the discussion and networking time.
Yeah, thank you so much for giving it back to me. We are already in the discussion time, but since we have prepared something for you to provide some time in the middle to take a breath, to grab a drink or go to the bathroom, whatever you need, just take your time, like 4 minutes or something, and I will explain what you can do on our Miro board while some people are grabbing their drinks. We have this discussion area, and I will quickly reshare my screen so I can show you where to go to. We are on this Miro board, and maybe someone can put the link back on the Zoom chat. Anyone on the live stream on YouTube finds it in the description right below the video. Just go to the Miro board, and we have this discussion area on the right. Zoom in with scroll or depending on the devices. And I want to have some examples of dark patterns shared with our audience here. So if you have any screenshots, anything that you want to share, that you have experienced yourself, that you thought, well, that's a funny one, or, well, this is really, really distracting me and bringing me off track, share it with us in the discussion area on the dark patterns. And we will come back to that in the networking session right after it. And I think now's the perfect time to open up the discussion, and anyone who wants to take part in the discussion, I ask you to share your video. It's available public, so you have to fear that someone's watching you, someone you might know is watching you. And I will get you on stage as soon as your video is turned on. I don't want to have any anonymous faces here in the discussion back in the meeting. So now we have prepared some questions, or taken some questions and I ask anyone to unmute who comes on the stage. So be prepared. Around the topic that we have here. And I want to start with the first one, which is about trust. And the question that was given by the organizers from the World Usability Day was, can we, how do we create trust in the online environment? Anyone up on stage here? We have already some ideas around this topic and have heard something about it, but maybe, and since Thomas is having kind of a grinning face, maybe you already have an idea. What do you think? And it's really open to everyone. Turn on your camera and I will invite you on stage so you can share your thoughts. So Thomas, what do you think? How do we create trust in the online environment?
What I think, I'm on now. Here's my camera. Yeah, what I think it's quite good question actually, because building trust is not a one-step process. It's not about just doing one interface. It's a long-term process where you have a lot of influential parameters on it. So if you want to build trust, in my opinion, the key is transparency. Be transparent, be what you show what you're doing, show also what your restrictions are, and about the different things that you might not do that good, but where you're working on it. So just communicate honestly with the users and with maybe potential customers. I think that builds, that's a quite good process of how to establish and build trust, because when we talk about trust, the key is communication. We need to enable communication. If there's no communication, there's no reason why we should just simply trust it just because of your social trust, social communities, different social trust patterns, specific badges that you use. That all piles up, of course, to your trust potential. But in total, you need to communicate and be honest with your users. And for example, I have a quite good example actually. I don't want to say the company, but I just bought an electronic device online, and yeah, it just didn't work. And when I just gave the information in some public review that it didn't work, I was immediately contacted by the company, and they really offered me discussions how to solve problems, what happened, try to really find out what happened. It's, of course, you can say it's customer service, but it's also an action on how to build trust. And in this case, it's not UX design, but more service design on how to build up your services.
Great point. So you think it's about the contact that builds trust, so not the experience by itself?
It's both, actually. It's, of course, the experience. The experience gives you the initial trigger, actually, to make a trustworthy action or a trusting action, depending on which side you are, of course, if you're the trustee or if you're on the other side. And if you need to establish trust because you build a product. And so it depends what you do. If you have trust actions that establish it, quite a good potential of trust, but it's one way of communicating. All you do as a UX designer is build an interface which does nothing else but communicate with a user. Every user interface does that. And if you build, of course, make a good UX, it's much more than just the user interface itself. It's about the whole experience around it. You need to set up an environment, and you need to set up a context that the user resides in and where the company resides in. And if both reside in the same environment, then you can enable communication.
Okay, thank you. I think, Peter, you wanted to add something.
I think it's not just about transparency. I would go one step further and saying there are uses of computers and algorithms that are fundamentally dubious. And this is from a presentation where I just put the link into the chat. It's called Recognizing AI Snake Oil. And there are some things which algorithms in general, but AI and machine learning in special, are just not something we should use at all. So predicting social outcomes, which is the main thing here, is something that cannot be done by software. This is an idea that is actually very old. In the 60s and 70s, people, when computers were very new and people started to think about computers, how computers could solve everything, there were already the first papers being written that there is a class of problems that computers cannot solve. And these problems actually fall into that category. You know, all those systems where you pre-classify people applying for a job at a company, they are ridiculous use of AI. They should, that's just wrong. And funnily enough, somebody showed that a couple of days ago. I can talk about that if you want. But so if we find this kind of use of predictive algorithms or machine learning or AI, we should object in any case. There's transparency doesn't help.
For anyone who's not on the Zoom call, I put the link that Peter mentioned on the Miro board right at the discussion area, so you can find it as well and look it up and read a little bit of more information. Okay, Thomas, another point.
Yeah, not just another point. Actually, thanks, Peter, for the points. I don't think that this totally reflects the ethical issues that actually every UX designer should follow. And not UX designer, but product designer in general should follow, because of course we have ethical problems, issues that need to be targeted in a specific way and in a quite sensitive way, of course. And some of them are capsuled in a private sphere, some more in a public sphere. It depends on how the ecosystem basically is set up with this specific problem that we are addressing.
I know that S. Egger wants to say something, but maybe just one sentence more. The problem with, and why I especially think that designers should grab responsibility here is because technology people are usually fascinated about what can be done with technology. They don't think much about what cannot or should not be done with technology. And this is probably one of the things designers have to bring into the process. It's maybe, yeah, I would say it's their responsibility if they in turn get the role to be responsible for the whole design.
Okay. I think Mr. Mrs. I don't know how you want to pronounce yourself, Egger, just wanted to be on stage with us without mentioning something. So thanks for joining us. And thanks for this really great insights. And I will take it further to the Wonder Room afterwards to dig into this discussion again. And go to the next point where maybe some others want to join. So just turn on your camera and I'll invite you to speak here. And the second question I want to get into the discussion is, what are the ethical implications of our design? Anyone thoughts about this? Anyone ideas? Who wants to share their first thoughts? And yes, it's okay. Thomas, Peter, you can go on and just bring the discussion on. If there are no ideas.
Yeah. I think ethics is one thing every day, not only designer, but every human should have. And also with what Ella, the information Ella gave us in her talk about accessibility, it's about including people and thinking of people which are not mainstream, and thinking about everybody who could be, as we a UX designer, part of our target group. Of course, we don't focus on everybody because we all know designing products for everybody simply doesn't work. You always need to differentiate, but an specific ethical conduct should be the basis of on which every designer works. That's my opinion. Konrad?
I have to ask people to unmute because of the interruption before. So, Konrad, you're on stage now.
Thank you. I also thank you for pointing back to Ella's great talk in the beginning. And usually, I don't want to be overly political correct, but I think that it makes sense not to talk about mainstream or standard. I always, also when giving lectures or talks or speaking with students and colleagues, I'd like to see the audience or humanity as a variety of people determined by several variables, which are more or less Gaussian curves or natural distributions or bell curves. So there are a few people without any borders on every side. And there isn't anything like normal or standard or able or disabled, but there is just a variety of properties. And because we have already heard and discussed that it makes perfect sense to integrate accessibility because it might be useful for everybody, even either in a special situation or like having a broken leg or carrying a heavy suitcase, then physical aids to entering a building might make sense for you, but also like something that's maybe developed or designed for blind people perfect makes sense if you are multitasking and you cannot watch the dashboard while driving the car because you need to focus your attention anywhere else. So actually we just decide for a variety or a continuum of individuals, and accessibility is important, but I wouldn't consider it as something that's just aimed at a specific target group, which might not be in the center of the development or company goals in the beginning. But it's just a matter of priorities, of course, but there isn't any line that you can draw. Actually, I'm not really interested in any separation or division or lines, but in the intersection, in what happens if you want to cross them. That was a little not on one side, but yeah.
Yeah, it's totally fine, and it brings us forward with our discussion that we're having, because the last thing that I want to point out is about accessibility and not about the ethical design implications that I had asked before. And since you mentioned this differences in being not able to do something, there is a really great handbook from, I think it's Microsoft, who point out the differences of temporary, situational, and the other types of disabilities that you might appear. And I'm totally, yeah, I'm really taking this into my university courses usually and discuss this with my students, and they brought up a point that I didn't think about before when it comes to what would be something that is like a situational, temporary, or like a lifetime disability on you're not able to hear. And they brought up the example of the traffic in Mumbai. And I was thinking like, okay, this is something that is generally happening, so you can't hear anything there. And I was like, okay, crazy idea, but nice to have. But the question that I bring to you, and thanks Ella for joining us here up in the discussion, is how do we design for accessibility to ensure that everyone can use our designs? And Conrad already mentioned it. It's not about not only everyone, but also in every places or wherever you're using it. So maybe you can bring up some thoughts to this question.
So let me recap that. You want to know how to design accessible, like how to start?
Yeah.
Yeah, the first, I think that's what I actually want to do with my talk is I want to motivate you to really connect to that community and really be proactive about to know what it actually means to have a disability and what kind of implication that has on people's everyday life. You really want to be an observer and a listener here. You want to have an open mind, and the more you learn about people, the more you're going to think about that when you're designing. It's just a very natural process because you're not just drawing from your own experience anymore and your own bias. You're suddenly like, oh yeah, there's people out there who will not be able to see this color change, so I should probably like put something there to, you know, facilitate that, make it more clear. I mean, all these things are also like in guidelines and in principles that you can go through. But for me, it's been like the most sustainable approach to just really learn how people use technology every single day and what that really means. It's genuinely so insightful and fascinating.
Mm-hmm. Maybe I can add on a question. Since making something accessible to me is something that you missed out in the first place. If you're designing something, and let's bring this really visual example of a wall that you build somewhere where some people might not be tall enough to look over it, and you just put stairs there to climb up, then making something accessible is just like putting a workaround for the barrier you put there in the first place. And you already discussed it in your talk. Do we have some responsibility as designers to really try to avoid those barriers, or do you think it's enough to make it accessible afterwards?
I think all the responsibility lies on us. I think, especially with the other talks and tying these things together, you should really get a feeling how much impact your decisions have. And you're not designing how something looks like. You're not just making fancy graphics. You really decide how something works. And that is a whole process. And I'm sure you're all aware of the complexity of our craft. But to solve these problems, you want to make sure that you ask the right questions right beforehand. This is not about, building in hindsight. This is really about making intentional design decisions. And the more information you have, the more variables you're aware of, the better decisions you're going to make at the end of the day.
Any other thoughts on that?
From me?
No, from someone else. Anyone on stage?
Okay. Yeah.
Yeah, I could say something if you like.
Yeah.
My name is Stefan. I'm just a technological nut, so that's why I behave very weird here. So sorry for that.
But do not worry about that at all.
Hello, Konrad. Actually, I'm designing in a more material world, which means that I mainly do science and symbols, and I also working in standardization of public information symbols. And I have to agree that designers should really get involved into this mess when it comes to issues of standardization or legislation and things like that, and also into science and research. And that's something that I experience designers not to be too keen on. A lot of this was what we call accessibility is yet unknown. A lot of standards or guidelines are, well, you can trust them, but actually you could do better. And if in my own experience, when you work, for instance, with people with visual disabilities, they really will tell you about what they can see and what they can't see. And that's a good job for a designer to process that and learn from it, yes, but also to take it to the abstract and see how it fits to all the other disabilities, visual disabilities that there are around. So that's just an urge for designers to really also get into research and look into research, which doesn't happen really too often with designers, It's just a nudge to do that. Yeah, all I have to say. Thanks.
Yeah.
Thank you.
That's a really great point. You should really always, everything you do and design has a bigger context, and nothing is isolated from each other. So you're really that's where the complexity stems from, right? If everything was isolated, our job would be done very, very easily. But to really tie that back into how the whole thing fits together that is an art. And I'm really sorry that you've made this experience with designers not liking to look into research. I think there's often a very misconceptions about designing meaning mainly visual things, but it really is to understand the whole process. And I wanted to talk about the algorithms earlier as well, when we talked about them and whether designers should get involved with that. Yes, absolutely, you should get involved with that, because that is basically what the output is going to be on your system. This is what's going to be the result that you're showing. So you want to understand, you want to design the output of the algorithm, how it's going to work. Okay, specialists can obviously do that, but you really want to make sure you communicate what the outcome should be, and to design that too, that is very much in your task range as well.
Mm. Yeah, maybe if I can add something. Sure. I found for myself in design work that I do, to understand myself as the advocate or lawyer of the user in the process, puts me in a position where I automatically think more about their interests and what they want instead of what everybody else in the project wants. And that helps a lot. Just thinking of yourself in that way helps to shift your perspective and your position and the ideas you can have.
Mm-hmm. That's true.
It's also a very common term that is used for describing the role of UX people in companies or organizations or consortia. It's like the advocate for users that are outside and the evangelist to the inside on the other hand.
Mm.
Actually, I think I totally agree with you all, basically. I think there's a big misconception about design, UX designers in general, because it's not about designing the interface itself, it's about laying the basics. It's about finding out what needs to be, what are the problems, what needs to be solved, well, what is the context we are in order then to create a design later on based on this all this information that we got. And the main part is of our work is here identifying, finding out what to do, and not the doing or drawing something itself.
Yeah.
Okay. So I would say, since we are at the end of the official part, and this is a really, really great discussion that we're having right now, we take it towards our Wonder Room and go on with the discussion at the Wonder Room. The link is on the Miro board, and I can quickly copy the link. I hope I can copy it. Should work to the chat. For anyone who's still on the YouTube channel, go to the Miro board. You find the link in the description and join the Wonder Room. I again have to thank all the organizers who made this possible, and thank all of the organizations who supported us here. Really appreciate everything, and I hope that we are managing to do this again next year, come together from all around Austria and have one World Usability Day here online together. Hopefully next year, like a hybrid event on site and streaming to the other places. Would be a wonderful experience. Thank you again. Thanks for joining us. And we meet in the Wonder Room. The link is on the chat and in the Miro board. So thank you all, and see you then there.